Gerard, this is the Global Digest think tank group. We do podcasting about regional issue. You are in government office or you are in private organization?
Currently, I am working part-time as a defense analyst. That's a remote and a part-time profession. I stopped teaching for a while, but I used to be in the military academy. I was instructor for national security in the Philippine Military Academy. And I also been teaching for the past 3 years. But I think it's a trend now that people get tired of the hustle, and I took a break. And as of now, I am taking a break from the academe, and maybe to rejoin eventually again, or depends what will be the future prospects of my career. But as of now, I'm prioritizing myself.
Let's see. It's you have a good free time probably. And
Yes.
uh, as you are specialist in Navy, how is Philippine position for defense, especially in terms of any aggression from any big country? What's defense strategy in terms of if any aggression?
The Philippines is actually not naive, and so was China. They both know what were the risks of these tensions. I would not call them disputes yet. I would call them tensions. And I would not even call them conflicts, because we all know, in international relations, these are technical terms when we say tensions, disputes, or conflicts. Perhaps the dispute was limited on the legal diplomatic aspect, but I would not call it dispute when we're speaking of the military terms. Like I said, China and the Philippines are not naive of the situations. China has no prospect of really engaging directly with the Philippines militarily to resolve these conflicts. Because if they do, they would not have resorted to these gray zone tactics that they have been employing in the region. The Philippines is also not naive to think that they could fight China militarily. That's why it has been the policy of the Philippine military and our foreign policy also, both our foreign and defense policy, to only achieve and to pursue self-reliance, or what we call minimum credible defense, which is as a way of deterring China into encroaching further into regions that are being claimed in accordance to international laws. So that's that's my overview or my observation of both the Philippines and China. They are both being cautious and careful. So if there are things or incidents that are happening, these are actually not done without any thorough contemplating, or they have not that been contemplated properly. These are thought well, even on the side of China. That's why they are limiting their actions and behaviors to what we call gray zone tactics. And so with the Philippines, which is resorting to exhausting most of the diplomatic tools that are available for them.
Yes, it is the best we wish without any, fighting, any conflict in this region. If you can solve problem very smoothly, that's the best. But we also see, blocking and also, sometimes physically, they destroy fishing boats, and they build, the artificial islands and they build a lot of infrastructure. It's a very high concern about, this build, not only with Philippines, also with also Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, all are concerned. And China is, we want if there is a all side agreement, but usually big power, we don't know their behavior. They can hypothesis and they can, do any kind of action, even invasion or occupation that usually release politics can happen. And I see the Indonesia president also reaching out Philippines nowadays. How did you see what common thing or what agreement between Indonesia and Philippines can, can combine in this region? Any defense strategy or maritime strategy, including ASEAN issue?
One more thing about the credible defense posture of the Philippines is that it's not uh dependent to uh to Philippine efforts alone. Because there is what we call the AFP modernization program. So it's not only reliant on that. That's only one aspect of the credible defense posture. We are also exhausting all across. We're trying to exhaust all tools that are available. It could be political, diplomatic, legal, and there's also some military approach, which is where the whole of alliance approach is being used. And this is where your question comes in, that what can Indonesia and the Philippines do together? Well, the Philippines always move it's a two-prong approach as I observe it, because they're not only moving through political diplomatic, they're also backing it up with defense efforts such as the joint patrols, tapping into the whole of alliance approach with more cooperation, with more maritime cooperation with our allies, particularly the United States, Japan, Australia, and there are also some other Western countries that are interested to join the joint patrols or cooperative patrols in the region. But with Indonesia, it is more of a political diplomatic approach. This is where the discussion on the code of conduct in the South China Sea comes in. Because what we only have as of now is the 2002 declaration. It's only a declaration. That was the compromise that was done in 2002. And when we say it's a declaration, that means it is not binding. That's what the ASEAN-China negotiations was trying to achieve right now, which is to make it a binding code of conduct. Unfortunately, the talks and negotiations for that for that new code, has been slow, and we all know the reason why, because China have many interests, and they were trying to interject those interests into the new code, and the ASEAN on the other hand has been opposing these interests as they are contradictory to their national interests as well. So it's still an ongoing negotiations, deliberations, and our president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has become he could no longer wait for that. That's why he tried a new approach of engaging rather with other ASEAN countries where the Philippines have our own territorial disputes. That could be called a dispute because there's a legal contradiction there. So we have that ongoing not only with China, but also with Vietnam, with Malaysia, Indonesia, with the overlapping areas where there are overlapping claims based on the UNCLOS. And what the Philippines is trying to do is to first establish a code that could be binding first among the ASEAN and then eventually could include China. And all fingers crossed with that approach. But with Indonesia, President Widodo will be arriving in Manila for a state visit. And that is actually an indication of a growing cooperation, diplomatic relations between Indonesia and the Philippines. And there's so much potential with that relation. One thing that I find funny is because when during the previous administration, there has been a setback on enforcing the arbitral ruling in favor of the Philippines. I find it funny because the country that has been using and invoking that ruling is Indonesia, and they've been using that ruling as a basis of fighting back against China with their claims in the Natuna Islands. And and that's a lesson not only to Indonesia but also for other ASEAN countries that are also having tension and disputes with China in regards to these claims in the South China Sea. So there's so much potential in the Indonesia-Philippine relations if that was also included in the question, particularly in first in the discussion for a new code, and second is for joint and that's for the political diplomatic part and aspect, and on the military aspect could also be the maybe a potential or a prospect for also Indonesia being invited for a maritime patrol also in the region. And also because Indonesia is a neighbor um, in the southern part of the Philippines along with Malaysia and Brunei. So these areas are still included in the 9-dash line, which is now a 10-dash line claim by China. So it's it's a very huge claim. And we need, with that huge claim by China, we also need a very expanded and a very broad whole of alliance approach, whether the aspect and approach is in political, diplomatic, or in legal, or in military approach. We need to exhaust all of these tools as a way to deter China, as a way to pushing back against China.
Right. It's hopefully it can be a good cooperation in the region, and it's important regional, cooperation. And also you mentioned you need align and partnership with other country, especially U.S. is key to the Philippine in case of any conflict to back Philippines. So U.S. used to be, your colonizer, as well as they used to be a base in Philippines, a lot of military base in Philippines, and at that time, if under U.S. control, you are no responsible, you don't have not much worry about in terms of defense because U.S. is control, But now U.S. is no more control. You need in terms of help defense from the U.S. again. I saw when 1990s, a lot of Filipino also protest against U.S. military in Philippines, and since then they get them out U.S. military. What main reason a lot of U.S. military are expelled in 1990, something like that?
So you're asking why did we kick the US out in
Right. I mean,
1990s?
at the
Yeah.
time, you can make a little bit better, I mean, smoother way. They may be
Yes.
expelled, but I mean, smoother. But in 1990, I see a lot of Filipino dislike, the population dislike U.S. military there, a lot of protests.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there can be, you know, properly, uh, I mean, smoothly, uh, they can expel, but it seems a lot of angry was there. So, if you can explain the history, great, that can be more
Yes.
clarified.
Sure. Actually, it all boils down to politics. You need to understand the context of 1990s for you to understand why we kicked out the United States and their military bases here in the Philippines. Um, there are actually many reasons. That's why it's also a win-win situation with the US at the time. And a win-win situation also with the Philippines. You need to understand that the 1990s, it was a decade after, or it's an administration after the People Power Revolution in 1986. So we just had a new administration, which was President Corazon Aquino. So she was struggling to restore the democratic institutions at the time. And since this is a post-revolutionary period, the emotion and the sentiment for nationalism was very high at that time. That's why the Senate, which was in charge of ratifying the renewal of the bases at the time, it was basically occupied, the seats were occupied by nationalist senators. And the sentiment for anti-US at that time was very high. Also because of we all know what post-revolutionary periods are, the emotions are high, the intellectual discussions are very ubiquitous, and the academic discussions on our national consciousness was very prevalent at the time. It was a perfect moment for nationalist and patriotic uh, activities. And the anti-US sentiment was a very easy target at the time, aside from the fact that they were in connivance with the dictatorship, with the Marcos dictatorship, for who ruled the Philippines for over 20 years, that they have enabled Marcos with all of these human rights violations. That is why the anti-US sentiment was so easy to be a target at that time, to be a national issue. That's why closing the military bases was so easy at that time. And the second reason is because of the volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo at that time, which is very close, very proximate to the military bases in central Luzon, which also affected the bases. So it's a win-win situation. It's a win for the Philippine politicians at the time that they were able to earn very popular support from the people because of the anti-US sentiment. And it's also a win-win situation for the US because they have saved a lot of money for repairing the bases. But the people at that time could only make decisions based on what were the circumstances surrounding them and what are the information they have at that time. They are not clairvoyants. At the end of the day, they cannot predict what the future holds. We have only seen the effect of that closure of the bases when in the next administration, China has became or has started um exploring the waters in South China Sea, particularly in Spratlys, and started building artificial islands in the 1990s. Not only Philippines, but also Vietnam was also a victim of these explorations. And then that's why in the administration of former President Estrada, we had no choice but to deliberately ground a ship which is now a BRP Sierra Madre near Ayungin Shoal as still an active station of the Philippine Navy in the area to take control of those areas that we have claims. And we are now seeing the impact of the closure of the bases because China was not able to do those explorations if the US was still, particularly the air bases and the naval base, was still present. And the closure, although it's a win-win situation for Philippines and US, the real winner at the time, actually, I think, as time has revealed, is China, because it was a very opportune time for them um, to be closer and to explore those areas and to establish a hold of those claims and reinforce their 9-dash claim.
Right.
9-9.
We can learn the lesson. It's time also speaking, it's time and circumstances is changing. In 1919, circumstances and current circumstances are a lot of different, as you mentioned, in Philippine geopolitics. At the time also, China was not that economic power. They are still very low economy. And after only 20 years, China become economic growth. At the time, China has no economic power at all, even no military power. But Philippines, also did not expect that such thing will be happen. So in the absence of U.S. military, U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, China take advantage and they explore and they claim a lot of islands in the South China Sea. That is a big, is a kind of security loophole in the South China Sea. So China take advantage. So Filipino population did not know, and that time they anti-U.S. military is mostly probably for temporary, short-term calculation thinking. Now Filipino population, I don't know, right now Filipino population are willing to welcome or US also willing to cooperate again. How the relation between US and Filipino two countries at the moment, it will be improving or will be better cooperation? How can you say that?
Even though we have chosen to expel the military bases of the United States in the 1990s, there were efforts and innovations around the policy for the US to be able to come back here in the Philippines. Not only because we really need the United States, although that's also a fact, but Philippines is also strategic for US interest in Asia Pacific, in Indo-Pacific region. And one of the innovations that they have done is rooted with the original treaty in 1950s, which is the Mutual Defense Treaty. And in order to operate, there are so many ways and approaches to operate or to reinforce the Mutual Defense Treaty of the 1950s between the Philippines and the United States. The establishment of the military bases is only one of those approaches. But that doesn't mean that we have kicked them out of their bases here, is that we're no longer an ally with the United States. The alliance still remained. And as of now, it's growing stronger. One of the innovations that we have done is the Visiting Forces Agreement. And then in 2012, we have the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which the United States no longer need to establish bases here, but we are just giving them access to our existing military bases in a rotational basis. And they are here for most of the time, they are here for Hadar operations or humanitarian assistance and disaster response operations, and all other operations that also include sharing of intelligence that have been very vital in our anti-terrorism efforts and counterinsurgency efforts. So it is difficult to deny that although the nationalist sentiment also have a valid point, that we should pursue independence in our foreign policy, in our domestic policies, without interference of foreign actors such as the United States. But our geopolitical circumstances prevents us to pursue that because there are geopolitical realities that we cannot sideline or abandon, especially the facts that the Philippines, although a big country, is still struggling when it comes to pursuing its minimum credible defense posture in the region, if we are talking about the defense of the West Philippine Sea, and with many efforts. And also because historically, United States and the Philippines are so intertwined. The Philippines is practically born out of not only of our Spanish colonial history, but also with American colonial history. So it's like saying the Philippines is not Philippines without America in its blood. Um, there are many other more explanations for this, but those are what I think really is the reason why the Philippines and the United States until today or for the next 100 years would remain inseparable.
Right. Yeah, we can see a lot of lesson, we want all independent and sovereign country, but sometimes we need a lot of cooperation again. 100% sovereignty is not exist in the world, I guess. Somehow we have interrelated cooperation should be among states and countries, and it's we have lesson learned, even though we want to claim regional integration and regional priority. We sometimes we don't want outsider from Europe, America, or Russia, but it's not always perfect. If you see the lesson in Philippines, if we want regional integration, but in the absence of American, China is exploring and taking a lot of islands, like that. If China did not, aggressive or a kind of claiming in the vacuum of American security in the region, it won't reason Philippines there will be no reason Philippines should invite American or other big power. It will be less chance to invite because in the absence of security, like American military, China is claiming. So you have to, see both sides. This side also aggressive, and regional power also aggressive. So South China Sea, or you said also Western Philippine Sea. We can use both names, South China Sea and Western Philippine Sea. I think we need more, analysis and more, arrangement and strategy for this regional security and regional cooperation. I think.
I would just like to reiterate that we also need to look at the big picture when we discuss these things. And the big picture here is it's not only about the major power competition that we're calling in international relations. Major power competition, well, is the big picture that would easily um, explain what's going on. We have one on the other side, the United States, leading what they call a rules-based international order, where all decisions must be based on rules. And then we have, on the other hand, one that is being led by China, which is proposing an international order that is based on hierarchy, that the the power of the might, okay, the might makes right. So it's not only a competition of our policies, and we also see different dimensions here, what we call PDM, the political, the diplomatic, the intelligence and information, the economic and the military aspects of all of this competition. And that's the big picture. That's how we paint what's really going on. That why I am saying this is because it's very dangerous that we're only talking on one aspect. That if we discuss only on the military aspect, we might be forgetting the political, legal, and diplomatic aspect of the issue. Then we're not really looking at the big picture. Then we might misinterpret it. Then what would be the impact of that is we're focusing on hating China or hating the United States. We must approach these issues, these tensions with civility, academically, intellectually, with um with diplomacy, with merit, with facts. This is my reiteration. And I hope that with your viewers and listeners, they would really give more time of reading and listening more before speaking of the issue and looking first at the big picture before giving their own perspective and insights of the issue. That's why it's very important that in this kind of issues, we really need to sit down and talk and open our books, open our internet to read and listen more across the spectrum of the issues, across all references and sources. That's the job of us as analysts. And I'd like to encourage everyone to act, to behave, to think more like an analyst, because we need more analysts today because of what's happening.
Thank you, Gerard, for today.
Thank you, John.